Just to be clear, today it seems like the Republicans have not really fought very much about whether or not Trump was guilty or not. In fact, their fight seems to be over whether or not you were authorized to prove their guilt. Do you recall a number of Republican members asking about whether or not your appointment was okay, even though we know that you've testified about the more than 100-year precedent that allowed for your appointment?
I was asked questions about that today, and our position, as we filed in our appeal, is that there was strong support for my appointment, including Supreme Court precedent directly on point.
Thank you so much. Additionally, everybody's been all gingerly here today, but I don't know why we're acting surprised that a man who had close to 90 allegations out of 4 different jurisdictions and ultimately ended up with 34 convictions after a jury was able to hear all the evidence would possibly be committing a criminal act on January 6th. In fact, considering the fact that we are now under the impression that he is violating people's due process rights, he is ignoring court orders, he's starting wars without congressional authority in contradiction to the Constitution. He's enriching himself to the tune of over $1.4 billion. He's shaking down electeds to draw maps that will help him stay in power because the Republicans don't understand that they swore an oath to the Constitution and that we are supposed to do checks and balances. He's also shaking down TV stations to get money. So why are we trying to pretend as if it is out of the realm for this particular man to commit the crime that he committed on January 6th, and frankly, the only reason he ran for president was to make sure that he would not be prosecuted, because I fully believe that you would have put him under the jail based on our long-form conversation that we had.
What's up, everybody? Major Retired Richard Ojeda here, and this hearing was never about finding the truth. It was about rewriting it. It was about dodging the fact that Republicans who were caught in the scrum were terrified of the people that Donald Trump sent to storm the Capitol on January the 6th.
Donald Trump ran for president, like I said, so he wouldn't have to spend the rest of his life in prison. The chairman and other members of this committee have spent all day attacking you and trying to rewrite the history of January 6th. But Mr. Jim Jordan, the chairman, failed to mention how he was running around the Capitol terrified by the possibility that all those insurrectionists would harm him. In fact, on page 97 of the deposition transcript, you mentioned how Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, quote unquote, never saw Jim Jordan so scared.
Jim Jordan, that pathetic worm who's done absolutely nothing for his constituents, didn't convene a January 6th hearing to uncover new facts or confront what actually happened that day. He convened it to launder Donald Trump's crimes, protect Republicans who helped enable them, and gaslight the American public into believing that what we all watched with our own eyes somehow didn't happen. But it didn't go quite the way little Jimmy had planned. In fact, the whole situation blew up right in his face because Jasmine Crockett stepped in and sank Jim Jordan's entire narrative.
The chairman also failed to mention that he was in direct contact with the White House in the days leading up to and on January 6th, which is why his toll records were subpoenaed by your office. Let me be clear, because they're trying to act like this is Democrats on Republicans, and I guess you are a covert Democrat that knew that he was going to try to steal an election before he tried to steal that election, and so therefore you were somehow put into place. I mean, the conspiracy theories make your head spin, but nevertheless, were you going to subpoena the toll records of every single Republican simply because they were a Republican?
No, we subpoenaed the toll records in the course of this investigation because they were relevant to our investigation.
Relevant? Oh, okay. All right, so that means something about facts. So let's talk about facts. Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, yes or no?
That's correct.
Okay. In fact, 60 federal and state courts have found that there was no evidence of election fraud. Trump's own attorney general and vice president knew that he lost the election, but he still tried to steal the election by pressuring state officials, designing fake elector plans, nearly having Mike Pence hanged, and ultimately demanding that his supporters, quote, fight like hell, correct?
Correct.
She reminded us of what Republicans are desperate for the country to forget. That January 6th was a crime. And the people now pretending to investigate it are the very same people who were running for their lives when it happened. The only reason Donald Trump ran for president again was to stay out of prison, period. It was never about America first or saving the country. It was about self-preservation. One man, desperate to outrun accountability, dragging an entire political party down the crapper and its cult along with him. And Jack Smith absolutely had him. The facts were there. The case was there. The evidence was overwhelming. Donald Trump was on track to be convicted. He was staring down the real possibility of spending the rest of his stinking, rotten, miserable life in prison. And Republicans know it. That's why they're lying this hard. That's why they're turning hearings into circuses. They're not defending Trump because they believe in him. They're defending him because they know exactly what he did, and they're terrified of what happens when the truth finally catches up to them.
We all saw it happen we all saw what happened once they reached the U.S. Capitol. As your report outlines, President Trump knew that he would incite violence at the Capitol that day. In fact, some of Trump's senior advisors were pushing for violence. For example, page 81 of the report details how co-conspirators number 2, John Eastman, tried to convince Mike Pence to break the law, stating that, quote, violence was necessary. So it isn't just Trump who is responsible for the death of multiple law enforcement officers and the injuries of thousands of people. A lot of Republican members of Congress are also responsible. 147 Republicans voted to overturn the 2020 election results, including multiple members currently serving on this committee. And I will yield.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Republicans seeking re-election are in panic mode too. Every excuse, every contradiction, every lie thrown at the wall to see what sticks have been exposed. They don't need their followers to understand the truth. They just need them confused enough to ignore it. But that's where Jasmine Crockett and the American people echo the sentiments of the Capitol Police officers that were in attendance that day. Because what Jim Jordan tried to pass off on the American people was sheer cowardice. Jordan, Josh Hawley, Markwayne Mullin, we all saw pictures of them trying to get away from the mob that they now claim was so peaceful. The so-called Republican alpha males were too chicken shit to stand up to the chaos that they created. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't having any of it. She reminded everybody what actually happened, and we all saw it with our own eyes. And here's the part they don't like talking about. Jim Jordan, Markwayne Mullin, Josh Hawley, all of them were scared. Because when the mob breached the Capitol, they didn't know who it was coming for next. Think about it. How were those rioters supposed to know who was a Democrat and who was a Republican? The mob was whipped into a frenzy by lies, conspiracy theories, and propaganda. This was a feeding frenzy, and the panic was real. Panic created by the chaos Republicans themselves unleashed. And this is the lie Republicans keep pushing. They're trying to spin that into some cartoonish conspiracy, as if Democrats are just randomly going after Trump for fun, and their base eats it up, because it keeps them distracted and angry. And the reason Jim Jordan and his merry band of bootlickers are fighting this hard isn't because they're innocent. It's because they're terrified of what happens when the spin stops and the truth comes back to bite them in the ass. Because you can only erase the truth for so long before the people who lived it refuse to stay silent. At some point, the insult becomes too much. Capitol Police Officer Michael Fanone was in the room. So was Aquilino, Gonell, Harry Dunn, and Daniel Hodges, the men who stood between the angry mob and the lawmakers on January the 6th. Fanone was wearing a Dropkick Murphys t-shirt that read, "Fighting Nazis since 1996. That alone made the point. And when Republicans tried to minimize January the 6th, Fanone snapped. Because trauma doesn't sit there politely while politicians rewrite it. His reaction said exactly what millions of Americans were thinking. Enough is enough. While Jim Jordan, Josh Hawley, and the rest tried to play tough guy on TV, they were the same men running for their lives when things got real. Donald Trump told his supporters to take down the metal detectors because, quote, they're not here to hurt me. Jordan and the rest weren't so sure about that. And they were scared because they knew exactly what they did. They know how close they were to the fire. And deep down, they knew the reckoning was coming. And for a moment on January 6th, they thought it had arrived. And Jasmine Crockett left us with the warning that matters most. We are not out of the woods. We are still in danger. 147 Republicans voted to overturn the 2020 election. Many of them are still serving in Congress today. Some of them are sitting on that very committee that didn't just enable January 6th, they legitimized it. Donald Trump is not innocent. Jack Smith made that clear. The officers who bled that day made that clear. This is the curtain pulled back. The cult, the lies, the propaganda, the conspiracies, the cowards, and the heroes who stood against it all when it mattered. The truth is no longer hidden. The danger is no longer theoretical. Jim Jordan failed to mention how he was running around the Capitol terrified that day, and Jasmine Crockett would not let him forget it. And that tells you everything that you need to know. This hearing was never about the truth. It was about fear. Fear of accountability, fear of exposure, fear of consequences. January 6th stripped the mask off of a MAGA movement built on lies, cowardice, and self-preservation. What we're fighting now isn't left versus right. It's truth versus denial, democracy versus fascism, accountability versus impunity, good versus evil. The same people trying to rewrite that day are trying to whitewash our future. The question isn't what happened. We all saw it. The question is whether we finally hold them accountable. And that is an absolute fact. Sappers clear the way, airborne all the way.